Thank you for joining us again. We are in week 2 of our study of Ecclesiastes. And if you're like me and you're like the rest of the people in our community and in our nation, we're looking for wisdom and we're looking for guidance in a crazy year. And there's no better place to find it than in the Old Testament wisdom literature. So thank you for joining us. We're going to be in the book of Ecclesiastes. If you'd like to go ahead and turn now so that you can be ready for that moment when we get into the scriptures, it's going to be Ecclesiastes chapter 3. So in late July, we took this epic RV trip, thousands of miles over 14 states, and one of our destinations was Zion National Park. And we were really excited about this place because we'd seen pictures and we knew that it was going to be this amazing experience, but we had no idea what we were in for. And I remember the day that we arrived at Zion National Park, we were 2 days removed from one of the hardest hikes we'd ever have in the Grand Canyon. So our legs were already screaming a little bit and we were already a little bit tired, but we were excited to see what this new park would bring. So we arrived at Zion National Park, and it's in Utah, and they had built up the entire town as you're entering it to just suck all the money out of you that they can. There's so many different things that you could do and you can spend money on. But we were focused on our hike that was at the very back of this national park. So we got there, we rented bicycles. It was about a 3-mile trip uphill to get to the place that we were going to hike. And we got to this point when we were riding our bikes as a family where some of us, our legs were just a little bit too tired. The sun was a little bit too hot and there just wasn't enough cover. And it felt like toil. It felt like we would never get there. And the kids were starting to complain a little bit. Their bikes weren't adjusted perfectly. All of these small things started to become big things in our mind. But then we saw the cliffs and we saw the canyons, and we were absolutely blown away at the reddish and tan colored Navajo sandstone canyons that existed all around us and became almost overpowering. The sun was blocked out and it was just these giant towering caverns. I want to show it to you now. There are these moments in our lives that sober us up, and we experience the grandeur and the beauty of God's creation, and it completely changes our perspective. But these canyons that we were in have existed long before human civilization. The first people to call this place home arrived about 8,000 years ago, and they were called the basket maker Anasazi. And they were there for a time, and they began to cultivate the land, and they started naming all of these cliffs and all of these canyons in their native tongue. Soon they passed away, and other Native American groups moved in, and they cultivated the land. They had hopes and dreams. I imagine that they thought that they would be there till the end of time. But then they soon passed away, and other groups came in. In the year 1909, William Taft named this place the Munkintuweap and declared it a national monument. In 1918, the Mormons came in and they renamed absolutely everything. In their mind, there was no way that they could get Americans to come to this beautiful place and spend their tourist dollars when it had such a strong Indian name. So they began renaming these canyons and these cliffs after their patriarchs of the Mormon faith. One day, though, even those names will be lost to time, but those canyons will still be existing. You may be thinking in this moment right now, that's a phenomenal history lesson, Jack, but aren't we here to engage with the Word of God? But to me, these are reminders that throughout creation that remind us of how brief our tenure and our time is. We always think that our civilization and the things that we use our hands on are always going to be there. Our names are going to live on, and our pride begins to show in these moments. And as I surveyed the grandeur of this canyon, and how they've already seen all of these countless civilizations, and they've had so many names that have been placed on these giant mountaintops, and how they've all just been lost to history and time, I began to arrive at this existential question. What really matters? The things that we put our hands on. What can we do that lasts eternity? I know that 100 years from now, that even my own name will be lost in history. The work of my hands will be gone and forgotten. That area in my backyard that I've been clearing out of poison ivy and thorn bushes, one day it's either going to be overgrown with more poison ivy and thorn bushes, or someone else will cultivate it and make it even greater. And they will have no earthly idea who Jack Dyer was when those people live on that land. With this wisdom, that nothing we touch is going to last forever, that our names are going to be forgotten. How do I live right now in this moment that God has placed me? We find answers to that in the wisdom literature, and especially Ecclesiastes. One of the things that I love about Ecclesiastes is the teacher, or the preacher as he's called in this, he doesn't see the world through rose-colored glasses. He doesn't say everything is always going to be okay, but he soberly looks at the movements and the civilizations that come through, and he talks about how all of this stuff has a season and a time, and it will all pass away. If you were here with us last week and we looked at chapter 1, it became a little bit rough at times, because he starts examining all of these things, and he says, you know, from the things that I placed my hands on, all of this kingdom that I built up, this temple that I built, all of it is vanity, it's toil, it's meaningless. He talks about wisdom and how, you know, even acquiring wisdom, it's one of those things that we have it for a moment, but in the next moment we die and it's all gone. You see, the teacher, the preacher in this, he talks about how life is not fair, that at times things are going to get rough. But he uses this unique Hebrew word to describe this, and we find it about 38 times throughout the book. He calls all of this stuff that is toil, that is meaningless, he calls it hebel, which we find translated means meaningless and toil. But this isn't a perfect translation when we use the word meaningless and toil, because we don't have this exact same English concept. You see, the word hebel, it literally means a mist, a vapor, or smoke. It gives this idea of something that's here for a moment, but in the next moment, it's disappeared and it's forgotten. It's something like a bubble. When you blow a bubble and you try to capture it, you can capture it for a moment, but in the next, it's gone, and there's almost no evidence that it ever existed. So the author, he looks at the work of our hands, and he calls it hebel. He looks at this wisdom that we acquire, that we strive for, and he calls it hebel, a mist, a vapor, or smoke. All things that exist under the sun in the author's eyes, he calls it hebel. Hebel, like we said a moment ago, is used 38 times throughout this book. So it starts giving you more of an idea about how this author views things. He understands that everything is temporary. But it's also this beautiful statement. Everything about life is an enigma. It's a beautiful mystery. It's a paradox. So the author is painting this picture of a life that is uncertain, a life that is irrational, and a life that is sometimes ironic. If you are in the year 2020 and viewing this, unless you're a time traveler, you probably agree with that. You've looked around and you've probably built your calendar late 2019. You had your New Year's resolutions. But now that you're in 2020, you realize, man, everything around me is uncertain. At times, it's irrational. It doesn't always make sense. Life is a paradox. Life is an enigma. It is all Hebel. So let's listen to the teacher as he continues to develop this concept of what is Hebel. And we find that he starts to begin to arrive at how we can apply this to the lives that we live now. We're going to begin in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, beginning in verse 1. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. For everything in life, there's a season. There's a season of birth. There's a season of life. There's times to plant and there's times to heal. But over all of these good things that the author is describing, there's this dark shadow that exists over all the things that are good. You see, with each good thing, there's this inevitability of this next season or this evil that is coming if you're in a good season. And there's this relentless, monotonous pattern to life. And if you've been on earth for a while, then you've experienced this pattern. You've had times in your life where you look back and you said, man, this was such a beautiful and wonderful section of my life. And then you see these other monotonous, relentless seasons that it just felt like everything was piling down upon you. But you always find out that there is another season on the way, no matter which season you're in. And this monotony that we hear in this poem that is delivered by the teacher or the preacher is meant to even be experienced as monotonous. The word time is used relentlessly over and over and over to give us this idea that everything changes, that it's monotonous, that it gets tiresome, but it is a reality and a wisdom that exists in the world around us. You see, we will all experience the beauty of life, and we will also all experience the pain of death. There's going to be times in our life where we have prosperity, and there's times that we will experience hunger. One thing that the author notes that we can all agree with is that life is unstable. Life is unpredictable. No matter how much we try to plot out our calendars and our lives, there's always something unexpected just around the corner. So, what lesson can we take from this wisdom that seems so depressing and so hopeless? I believe it's this, that life is to be experienced rather than controlled. My expectations of what my life should be, it's all Hebel. It's a vapor. It's smoke. My calendar, the work of my hands, my dreams that I have for the future, it's all Hebel. And with that wisdom to know that I cannot control my own life, that this is something that happens to every single person that walks this earth, I am left to experience both the beauty and the pain of the world around us and the season that we're in. And I allow myself to experience what God is doing in this moment right now. The next section that we get into is so good. So I want to encourage you that as we go through these scriptures, lean in and listen. He begins to transition from this part where he's observed all of this stuff, and he begins to apply the wisdom that he has acquired. We're going to pick up in verse 9. What gain has the worker from his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. So he's had this unique ability or gift to be able to observe and apply wisdom of everything under the sun. He acknowledges that God has made beautiful things in his time. He shows us that God has placed this longing for eternity into our hearts. This is something that is unique to humanity, this understanding that there's something bigger, something vaster, but also that we can't control it and we can't grab a hold of it on our own. Solomon sees this and he understands this, but we get this glimpse of the future from him for the first time. So how do we live when our lives are Hebel, when our life is nothing more than a mist, a vapor, or smoke? Following along in verse 12. I perceive that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. There is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good. With all of this wisdom that he has acquired, with all of this wisdom that he was gifted by God, all that he was able to build and acquire, life is to be experienced rather than controlled. And I kind of lean in on that a little bit because this was a man who was in control of everything around him. And with his wisdom and his understanding of the different seasons that we experience in life, he says, you just got to soak it in. You have to be joyful in the moment and do good, regardless of the season that you're in. And though this is not explicitly stated in his words, there's this divine beauty that is happening throughout these early chapters, that we are not actually in control of anything around us. But the only thing we can do is find these joyful, beautiful moments in the random rhythms of life that we experience. So, as we come to a close today, if you are in a bad season of life, you may be saying, man, what did I do to tick God off? Why is he punishing me? Understand that every single person, from good to bad, experiences different seasons in their life. It doesn't mean that God is angry at you. It doesn't mean that he's punishing you in these moments. But pause, breathe deep, be joyful in the season regardless if it's difficult, and do good. And if you're in a good season in life, understand that, man, this is a beautiful moment, but there is another season that is coming. So I want to encourage you to soak up the moment that you're in right now. Understand that God is doing good things in this moment, and when the bad seasons come, he will be doing good things in those as well. So be joyful in these moments and do good. So no matter what time or life experience that you're in, life is to be experienced rather than controlled. So right now, as we come to a close, we want to go into a time of reflection. Whenever you're in the wisdom literature, it causes you to pause and reflect on your own life. And today we talked about how everything around us is Hebel. It's a vapor, it's smoke, it's here 1 second, it's nothing that you can grab a hold of and control. And so we want you to reflect on this question in this moment. Where can you find joy and do good with where your life is now? Thank you so much for joining us today. We would love to know what season of life that you're in. We would love to encourage you, pray with you, be a part of the life that you are living. Follow the link below and let us know what's going on, how we can pray for you, how we can come beside you. We also want to give you an opportunity to give as an act of worship today. You can follow the link below and do that as well. Now, church, go out and do good. No matter what season of life that you're in, soak in the good things that are around you. Because God adores you, God loves you, and he has a purpose for you no matter what season you're in. So go find joy and do good.